unmute myself. Okay, folks, let's start. Welcome to another virtual event with Neighbors on Call. I'm Susan Blunt, one of the directors of Neighbors on Call, and our other director, Becca Zirkin, is here too. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for our special guest tonight, Tom Jensen, who I saw a minute ago before everybody moved around on my screen. He's the director of the Public Policy Polling. We are so grateful to have you here tonight, Tom, and really looking forward to it. Note the Zoom control buttons on the bottom of your screen. I'd like to ask everybody now to please click on stop video. It improves the overall performance if you do that. We appreciate that. And then look up in the top right corner. There's a toggle switch that will alternate between speaker view and gallery view. We suggest the speaker view during the presentation part of the program. Becca?
Hi. Before we hand the mic to Tom, we just need to take a minute to talk about our role in this election. Neighbors on Call, or NOC, is laser focused on flipping at least one chamber of the North Carolina legislature, and there are three very important reasons for that. The first reason is policy. 10 million lives, North Carolinians, are directly impacted by the state legislature. The second reason is redistricting. Next year, the legislature will draw the electoral maps we'll use for the next decade. And third is impact. Talking to voters about down ballot candidates does lift the top of the ticket, but the reverse isn't always true. And those North Carolina House races are going to be won or lost by tiny margins. So your volunteer time could truly swing a race and maybe even control of the entire legislature. We need to flip 6 North Carolina House seats or 5 Senate seats, or preferably both. That means contacting voters like us in target districts. Our fabulous team, and that is you, knocked about 10,000 doors before COVID, and we estimate you've already made about 32,000 phone calls since March. And now we have to put the pedal to the metal. Passing it back to you, Susan. You're muted. There we go.
Sorry, you'd think we'd have this down by now. You'd be surprised how soon voting starts. You might be thinking in a couple of months. After all, the election's November 3rd, or maybe middle of October. Early voting starts October 15th. But in only 16 days, the county boards of election will start mailing out those absentee ballots to those who requested them. And that means, hypothetically, I know we have a little mail problem going on right now, but let's just say hypothetically you could receive your absentee ballot on September 5th, mark it up right then, fill it out, sign it, and mail it that day. So if you're waiting till later to get involved, later is now. Now, these August phone banks, which you'll see in a sec, sorry, there's always a tad of a lag, Sanji, these August phone banks that may be our last chance to connect with voters in these districts before they fill out their absentee ballot. There will be more phone banks in September. These are the remaining August ones, but we encourage you to sign up for 2 shifts in August if you haven't already. In fact, you can do it right now on our website during this meeting. Notice our focus on these 4 North Carolina House campaigns. 2 we need to flip. There's Nicole Quick's district in Guilford and Ricky Hurtado's in Alamance, and 2 in Wake County that we need to hold for Representatives Sidney Batch and Terrence Everett. By the way, 3 of these 4 districts also have flippable state Senate seats, so you're really getting double bang for your buck there. So we encourage everybody to do that. And this month, we're adding something new, and it's going great. Dina is going to tell you about our new buddy system. Dina?
Yeah, thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm thrilled to tell you guys about our new phone bank mentor program. How it works is when you fill out your RSVP for a phone bank, you click a button that says you're requesting a mentor, and then your mentor will be in touch before, during, and after the phone bank just to help answer your questions and make the whole experience a lot more fun. So I encourage everybody to join us and give that a try.
Thanks, Dina. Buddies are available for the August 22nd phone bank, but there are more coming. Now, you're not going to get a home run on every call. We all know that, being realistic, but we really are moving the needle. Fran, who's one of our wonderful phone bank point people, has some great snippets she pulled from the Google Hangout chat during the phone bank on Monday night. Fran, you want to share them with us?
I certainly do. You guys, some of you who are on this call will recognize these quotes on the screen, because after that, my second phone bank of the weekend, I was so excited to feel like the impact that you all were making was really being received by people. So I got off the phone and transcribed 20 or 30 different responses that said that you all are having a real straight up impact on this election. It doesn't mean that every call gets answered, and it doesn't mean that everybody, is ready to leap on the phone or doesn't have a disconnected line. But when you've gotten people, you've really gotten results. Everybody who, from recruiting their families into it to, being out to save the world from Donald Trump to, in this case, I love the one at the bottom, one of you who received a contact that was at a protest. So had to call her back the next day because she was busy already at a protest. And so I just want to emphasize how much difference it makes. And please do sign up for more of these, because the tide has turned, and I saw people in both the phone banks I was point person for hungry for information about voting and about your contact with them. So thank you, and go for it.
Thank you so much, Fran. And now the next point is we want to make sure all our volunteers are clear on the Democratic Party about how to vote. Patience?
Yes, and that message is that there are 3 safe and convenient ways to vote. Vote early in person, vote absentee by mail, or vote on election day. Make a plan and vote as early as you can. And, to the question, should I encourage voters to vote by mail? The answer is only if that's what they want to do.
Okay. Becca?
Thank you, Patience, for explaining that. It's really important that all of us who are making calls understand that messaging. So finally, we want to make sure that you join us on September 2nd at 7:30 p.m. for a pep rally with Representative Deb Butler and all of our candidates. It's going to be really fun. It's our big fall kickoff to put us in gear. We want to grow our troops. So please bring at least 3 friends and bring your calendar, and you definitely don't want to miss it. So please RSVP. Now, on to our program. Tom Jensen has been the Director of Public Policy Polling since 2007. During that time, he's overseen thousands of polling projects covering everything from presidential and Senate races to county commissioner and school board races all over the country. He is the voice behind Public Policy Polling's popular Twitter account, which has more than 100,000 followers. He's been honored by the Campaigns and Elections magazine as one of its rising stars in the industry. He's an honors graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. Tom Jensen, thank you so much for being here, and we will now hand it off to you. You're muted, Tom.
I think I'm good now.
Yes, you're good now.
Good. Thank you all so much. And I just want to start out by telling you a little bit about the context of some of these districts that you all are volunteering in, and then I'll get to the bigger picture. But I have a little list I keep for both the North Carolina House and Senate of the order in which I think we'll win various districts. So I have this is the 57th seat that will win. This is the 59th seat will win. This is the 61st seat will win. And I'm not saying we'll win all these things, but if we were to win this many seats, this is where this number seat would go. So the 61st seat I have us winning, the one that would give us control of the North Carolina House, is HD 59 and Nicole Quick. So you literally have on your list, and we haven't discussed this at all amongst ourselves, you literally have on the list of districts that you're volunteering in the one that I think would be the one that would give Democrats control of the North Carolina House. So I think that shows how good that your targeting is. House District 63, I have as the 57th seat that Democrats would win on the way to the House. And it's a very good choice of district because it's somewhere that on paper, we definitely ought to be able to win this year. You all did great work in the previous incarnation of the district in 2018, and we came so close to winning it. And now this is one district that in redistricting has improved. It's a better district for us now. So we should have a good chance, given how close it was in 2018, to now win in this new district that's slightly more hospitable. But it's a situation where the Republican candidate has been in various offices in Alamance County for decades. He's very well known. He's sort of an institution. And our candidate, as a first-time candidate, is not quite as well known yet. And I think that once voters are introduced to him and know who he is, they're going to like him and he's going to win. But we definitely have to do that work here over the next 11 weeks to make sure that voters are familiar with him and do know his story to help him go against this incumbent who's been in office for a long time. So I think that both of these districts that you all have chosen on the offensive side of the equation to get involved in are really good choices. And I commend what you're doing. And I think those are places that will help us to get over the top. So just to talk about North Carolina sort of from a broader statewide perspective to start out, I think people are thinking of this as being a hugely Democratic year. And it certainly is going to be a good year for Democrats. But when I sort of think about the overall statewide picture in North Carolina, to me, it's about a 51-49 Democratic lead. That's sort of the generic situation for Democrats in North Carolina. So you think about the governor's race, Governor Cooper's up by about 10 points. You think about the Senate race, Cal Cunningham's up by about 6 points. You think about the presidential race, Joe Biden's up by about 4 points. The reason that we're doing so much better in all of those high profile races is we have a candidate quality advantage in all of them. So Roy Cooper's done a great job as governor. Dan Forest is kind of blah. That's why we can be a sort of default +2 state, but Cooper's up by 10. Cal Cunningham has proven to be a really appealing candidate. Tom Tillis is the least popular politician in the state. Even Republicans don't like him. That's why Cunningham has a 6-point lead, even though the state's sort of default +2. I should note that I still think that that race is going to get closer because when you look at the undecided pool, it's mostly Republicans who don't like Tillis. And I think at the end of the day, they'll end up voting for him whether they like him or not. But nevertheless, we have a candidate quality advantage, 6-point lead. And of course, President Trump's unpopular, Joe Biden's popular enough. So that gets us to a 4-point lead in the presidential race, even though the default's kind of +2. But I think that sometimes people think that because the top of the ticket's doing really well, that means that we're in really great position to win everything. And that's not the case. It's not that we're going to lose the other stuff. It's just that the other stuff is pretty 50-50. If voters don't know a lot about the candidate specifically, we're still pretty close to being a 50-50 sort of state. So when you think about offices where voters don't know a lot about the candidates, like lieutenant governor or state treasurer or insurance commissioner, those kinds of offices are all basically tied right now. And they're places where you know, it's just going to be very close on the margins in terms of who wins and who loses, largely determined by who turns out or not, because those are races that, for the most part, aren't really going to be determined by persuasion from the candidates because voters aren't going to know enough about the candidates to really make a specific decision. Ooh, I like Wayne Goodwin better than Mike Causey or not. It's going to be decided by whether Democrats can get more people out voting for all of their candidates across the board or whether Republicans do a better job of getting everybody out voting for all of their candidates across the board. So it's sort of an interesting dichotomy between the top of the ticket where everything is hunky-dory because voters know the candidates and they like our candidates and they don't like the Republican candidates, and other races, including for the most part legislative races, where the picture is still encouraging for Democrats, but not hugely rosy because you don't have those sorts of candidate quality differences that we really see reflected when it comes to the top of the ticket stuff. So, you know, I sort of addressed those specific races that you all are working on in terms of the legislative picture, but I'll sort of give a broader overview. Redistricting, you know, as you all know, we have different districts in 2020 than 2018, which were also different from the districts in 2016. And the reason we have to keep on redrawing them is because every time the Republicans redraw them, they still make them unfair. And even though the 2020 districts are a little bit more fair than the 2018 ones were, still not that fair. So I'm going to tell you how I think the legislature would end up if the election was today, which it's not. And I'm going to tell you sort of where the potential is for ending up with a better outcome than we would have if the election was today. I think if the election was today, we would pick up 2 seats in the Senate to get the Republican majority down to 27 to 23, and we would pick up 2 seats in the House to get the Republican majority down to 63 to 57. So that means that over the next 76 days, we need to be able to have 3 more Senate seats where we're currently behind turn into ones where we're ahead, and we need to have 4 more House seats where we're currently behind turn into ones that we're ahead. So first I'll sort of talk about why this initial picture isn't better, although it's still good. You know, we did amazing work. You all did amazing work picking up the number of seats that we did in 2018, and we're already in a position to pick up more in 2020. But when we talk about getting to the 26th seat in the Senate or the 27th seat in the Senate, or we talk about getting to the 61st, 62nd, 63rd seat in the House, North Carolina voted for Donald Trump by 4 points in 2016. To win the seats that we need to win to get a majority in the Senate, we are going to have to pick up districts that Donald Trump won by about 10 points. So the state as a whole was Trump plus 4, but the seats that we need to get a majority in the Senate are Trump plus 10. And that shows you how, even though these districts are maybe a little bit better for us than the old districts, we still have to win districts that are 6 points to the right of the state if we actually want to get a majority. Whereas if we truly had fair districts, we'd be able to get to a majority just by winning districts that Trump won by 4 or 5, like he won the state as a whole by 4 or 5. If we were having the elections this year on a true nonpartisan map, I think we'd be favored to get the majorities in the House and the Senate. But with this map, we still have to win districts that are not exactly fair. And it's a similar story in the House. The seats that we would have to win to get a majority, the one that I have as seat 60 for us is the infamous Larry Pittman's district in Cabarrus County. Donald Trump won there by 17 points. And we have to win there if we want to get a majority, even though that state's 13 points to the right of the state as a whole. And I think that we do have the potential to win there because he's been such a lightning rod and is unpopular in the district to the point where we might be able to get people who generally vote Republican to vote Democratic, at least for the legislature, even if they vote Republican for everything else. But if we had fair districts, we wouldn't need to win a Trump plus 17 district to get to a majority in the House. So I just point out those things to just sort of point out that even though we got new districts, that is not all gravy in terms of all of a sudden truly making things fair. Now in the Senate, we did get 2 pretty safe new districts out of these new lines. So I feel very confident that we're going to get up to at least 23 Senate seats. And then we'll just see if we can flip 3 of these other tough ones or flip 2 of them and the lieutenant governor's race, which I think the lieutenant governor's race is probably easier to win than a lot of these Senate districts that have Trump plus 10 or so electorates. In the House picture, I think that we have a very good chance of picking up some of the new seats created by redistricting. There's a new Democratic seat in Pitt County that I think that we're going to be able to pick up that actually voted for Clinton. So that's going to get us another seat from what we have now. I think at the end of the day, and your efforts will make sure that this is the case, I'm pretty confident that we're going to end up winning HD 63 in the Hurtado race. And then we have another new district in Cumberland County, House District 45, a new district that was created that just narrowly voted for Trump. There's a pretty popular Republican incumbent in there John Zoka, but I think that at the end of the day, we're going to win that. So those pickups get us to 57 seats. So now let me tell you about the path in the House from 57 to 61 and about the path in the Senate from 23 to 25 or 26. Right now, in the districts that we need to win in the House to get a majority, we're within 5 points in all of them. And with the Senate, in the districts that we need to get a majority, we're within 4 points in all of them. So in both the House and the Senate, we're within 4 or 5 points in all of the districts that we need to win to get a majority back for the first time in a decade. And this is certainly the closest that we've been to being able to talk about that. I remember that when we had a good visit the second week of August 2 years ago, I said, this is the first time since 2010 that I can sort of see a path for a majority for Democrats in the House or Senate. But real emphasis when we were talking in 2018 on sort of. I didn't have the specific map written out on my computer like I do now, because it was still sort of like a big picture pie in the sky thing. I think I might have even said, you know, I think it's a 10% chance to get control of the House or Senate, which is up from the 0 that I would have had to tell you the last 3 elections, but it's still only 10%. This time around, it's a lot more than a 10% chance to get back control of the House or Senate. It's a very clear picture of what districts we need to win to get to that point, and we're within 4 or 5 points in all of those districts. Let me tell you a few other key things about sort of that picture. Not only are we within 4 or 5 points in all of these key districts, there's a lot of undecided voters on the fence. One thing that's sort of interesting about the presidential race this year and why I feel a lot more confident about it than I did in 2016 is, let's say that in August of 2016, Hillary Clinton was up by 3 in North Carolina, and that in August of 2020, Joe Biden's up by 3 in North Carolina. If Hillary Clinton was up by 3 in North Carolina in 2016, that meant she was up like 44 to 41, with 15% of voters still on the fence. If Joe Biden's up by 3 points in North Carolina in August of 2020, that means he's up by 49-46, with only about 5% of voters still on the fence. There were a lot more voters up for grabs in the presidential race 4 years ago than there are now, and that meant there was always a possibility, even though Clinton was favored, that if those undecideds broke strongly Republican, that he could come back and win. This time around, there's almost nobody undecided for president, and that makes it a lot harder for him to come back. What happened in 2016 was there were all these Republicans who said, I don't like Trump, but they didn't like Clinton either, so they said they were undecided, and then at the end of the day, they voted for Trump. This time around, that's not really going to be a dynamic because we have so many fewer undecided voters. So to get back to how this is relevant to the legislative races, even though there's almost no undecideds for president, in all the key legislative races, there's a ton of undecided voters for the legislature. In most of these key races where we're behind right now that we need to win, it's like 39 to 35, with 26% of voters still undecided. So there's a ton of room to persuade people in these legislative races by helping them to learn about our candidates in a way that there isn't so much in the presidential race where everybody's mind is totally made up. You know, if you call people for the presidential race, there's not a lot of persuadable voters. It's still important to do GOTV on the presidential race because we need to turn our people out. There's not that many people, though, who you're going to convince between Biden and Trump. There's a lot of people who you might be able to convince between John Harderster and Nicole Quick, or a lot of people who you might be able to convince between Ricky Hurtado and Stephen Ross, because in those districts, 1 in 4 voters are undecided. They don't know who the candidates are, so they're not sure who they're going to vote for. Let me tell you something that's true about the undecideds in almost all of the key races that we need to win. They're Democratic leaning. What we find for the most part in the key legislative races is that the people who are undecided for the state house are planning to vote for Cooper. More often than not, they're planning to vote for Biden. And more often than not, when we ask them, generally speaking, would you vote for a Democratic or a Republican candidate for the legislature, they lean toward the Democrats. But in almost all of the key districts that we're playing in, the Republicans have incumbents In a lot of cases, these Republican incumbents have been in office for a long time, and so they're pretty well known. And then when we ask, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion about the Democratic candidates in most of these districts, 80% of voters say they have no opinion about the Democratic candidates for the legislature one way or another. So a big part of why we are slightly behind in these districts is that voters just don't know our candidates yet. And I think that's where the work you all do comes in as so important, because in a lot of these districts, the people who are on the fence or the House are totally open to voting for our candidates. They just don't know who our candidates are yet. And I think that when you all have done the work to make sure that these people do know who our candidates are, those districts where maybe we're down 39 to 35 right now, we have a really good chance of turning those into 51 to 49 wins, both with your volunteer efforts and with fundraising efforts. One thing that's really encouraging about a lot of these districts is that we're actually outraising the Republican candidates. And right now, not very much of that money is getting spent because for the most part, you deploy your money in September and October, especially in legislative elections. But that nest egg advantage that we're building up financially in a lot of these key districts is going to help us make up these small deficits and get over the top and maybe get in the House from 57 to 61 or 62 seats, get in the Senate from 23 to 25, 26, 27 seats. And another sort of related point to that that's kind of interesting is that in most of these key legislative districts, we're doing better right now in the presidential race and the governor's race than we're doing in the state house race. For instance, we might have a district where Cooper's up by 4 or 5, Biden's up by 1 or 2, our legislative candidates down by 3 or 4. We know from how Cooper and Biden are doing in these districts that the districts are open to voting for a Democratic candidate. But once again, we just have to do the work to make sure that these people, as long as they're voting Democratic for governor, as long as they're voting Democratic for president, vote Democratic for the legislature as well. Feel like they know who their candidates are, that those candidates are somebody who they can be proud to vote for and end up voting Democratic up and down the line and not just on the sort of more high level top of the ticket stuff. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit more about some of the specific points that you all asked me to talk about, and then I'll be happy to take Q&A. One thing was about sort of voting issues, mail-in versus early versus election day. I think that your messaging that you showed in the slide at the start about how there are 3 good ways to vote, vote by mail, vote early, vote election day, I think that is perfect messaging in terms of how to tell people how to vote. Right now, what we're finding is that, let's say that we're polling a district that right now is tied. In a district that's tied, Trump is up by like 30 with people who are planning to vote for on election day. Trump is up by 10 with people who are planning to vote early in person. And the Democrats up by 80 with people who are planning to vote by mail. So it is just a huge polarization in terms of how people are planning to vote by method. Plus 80 for Democrats on mail, plus 30 for Trump on election day. That's going to have really big implications for being able to sort of interpret the election results. What North Carolina has tended to do is count the early vote, then count the election day vote, then count the mail vote. If they do that this year, at 10 o'clock on election night, Trump's going to be up by 20 in North Carolina, and Danforth is going to be up by 10, and we're going to be losing all of these legislative races by 20, if that's how the vote gets counted. Do not despair about that, because things will turn out fine once the mail vote gets counted, other than the fact that Trump, certainly will be sowing as much discontent as he can about that. But I think that it's very important for people to know that it's okay to go vote in person safely with a mask in either early voting on election day. Mail voting is not the only way you can do it. And if you're not comfortable that your ballot's going to get sent correctly with the post office, it is still okay to go vote. So I'm really glad to hear that that's the messaging that you all are using, because I think that people need to be able to use any of those three ways that they're comfortable with, both in terms of their health and in terms of the certainty that their vote will get counted. So I think that it's great that we're pushing mail vote, and I think it's also great if people aren't comfortable with mail vote and that they do feel that if they wear a mask, they can safely go vote in person early on an election day, that they will do that. Key issues. This is something that is helpful for us because the two biggest issues that we're consistently finding in our polling in battleground election districts are healthcare and education. And those are both districts that Democrats have an inherent advantage on. Voters trust Democrats more than Republicans on healthcare. Voters trust Democrats more than Republicans on education. So I think it's good that the two issues that voters have at the top of their issue list are things that are very much in our wheelhouse as Democrats, things that voters prefer us on, and we just have to go out and do the messaging on it and make sure that that sort of generic preference for Democrats on those issues ends up translating to us when it comes to specifically who people vote for as well. There's always this debate within politics. What's more important, winning over persuadable voters or winning over people who are sort of more persuadable voters in terms of being persuaded to turn out or not, as opposed to being able to be persuaded between voting for Democrats or voting for Republicans. One thing that was great about healthcare in 2018 was that it was both the best issue for winning over swing voters who might go for Democrats or might go for Republicans. It was also the best issue for getting over sort of drop-off voters, people who might vote in a presidential election but don't necessarily vote in midterm elections or lower turnout elections, that sort of thing. Healthcare was an issue that got some more moderate Republicans who thought what Trump wanted to do on it was really terrible to come over to our side of the fence. So it was good in terms of sort of winning over swing voters in that way, but it was also really good in terms of getting the Democratic base fired up and getting people to come out and vote who maybe didn't necessarily always start to come out and vote in those midterm elections. So very good news for us that healthcare and education are so strong. So if I seem distracted, it's because questions keep popping up. And because of that, I'll just turn it over to question and answer, because I think there's more than enough questions to fill the rest of our time, and I'd rather address the things that you all specifically want to talk about than just spiel. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Q&A.
All right, well, let's see now. Patience, and I think one of the top issues I'm seeing bubble up, and I'm sure you are too, about the counting of ballots, the absentee ballots as they arise. Can we bring that one up to the top, Patience, and then we can get on to the others too?
Sure. I mean, I think I can just clarify that mail-in ballots, I know this is the way it works in Durham County, mail-in ballots are scanned every few days starting in late September, and those that get in a timely manner will be counted at the same time on election day as the early votes, which are also scanned in early. Votes are only counted on election day. I think that's what the question was. Okay, Tom, starting with our folks are really interested in the other two candidates that we are working for, Sydney Batch and Terrence Everett. Can you tell us how they're doing?
So we have not done any polling in those specific districts because our clients, for the most part, are really focusing on offense in the seats we need to pick up. And they're sort of taking the approach that the incumbents need to fend for themselves. So I think that's part of why it's really good that you all do have a couple of these districts that you're involved in that are incumbent ones, because they may not receive the same level of outside help that they received 2 years ago, because there is this sort of, there's this general thought within sort of the legislative politics machinery, which is a combination of DC and Raleigh decision making, that for the most part, the like outside spending, if we're going to have any chance of getting majorities, is just really going to have to go on places where we're playing offense, and that if our incumbents can't take care of themselves, we're not going to be able to get a majority anyway. So that's why I don't have any polling on them specifically. But for instance, Sidney Batch's district, even after redistricting, is a district that voted for Trump in 2016. And she won by a very narrow margin in 2018. So I think that is still a good place for you all to be involved, because the worst thing that could happen on election night is if we do pick up enough Republican seats to get a majority, but then it turns out that we were asleep at the wheel on protecting our incumbents, and we maybe have an unpleasant surprise where we lose one or two of our incumbents, and then we still end up at 61-59, even though we won enough Republican seats because we didn't hold on to all of our Democratic seats. I think most likely for both Sidney Batch and Terrence Everett that they'll end up winning by more than they did in 2018 because they have the advantage of incumbency now. But Sidney's district especially, that voted for Trump, I think it's good to be vigilant. And of course, Sidney's so wonderful that she's somebody who's totally worth working for under all circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Another question that we had, which maybe you don't know the answer to since your clients are not at-risk seats, but Robin wanted to know, are there any Democratic House or Senate seats that are at risk?
So there's a couple that changed a lot because of redistricting that are going to be more challenging just because of that. It has nothing to do with our candidates themselves being weak or doing anything wrong, but there were just changes made in redistricting. There's one in the Sandhills, that's about a Trump plus 17 district, and the Democratic incumbent got appointed to a position in the Cooper administration. So now we have an appointed incumbent running for re-election, but the Democrat had held on forever. He was just kind of an institution, even as his district got more and more Republican. So that one is going to be certainly not impossible to hold on to, but it's going to be a challenge. And then there's a district in Robeson County that went from being a Clinton plus 4 district to a Trump plus 8 district in redistricting. They sort of took the Robeson County seats from being one that was pretty safe for Democrats and one that was pretty strong for Republicans, and made them both more competitive. So Charles Graham's been in office for 5 terms, our incumbent. He's certainly been a strong candidate over the years, and I hope he'll win again, but the district was made tougher.
Okay. Ellen wants to know, what is the margin of error in your polling?
Most of these polls had about 600 respondents, so the margin of error for a poll with 600 respondents is plus or minus 4%. And a group this savvy, you all probably already know this, but sometimes I explain to people that the margin of error is on both candidates' support. It's not on the margin, it's on each candidate's support. So let's say that in one of those districts where the Republican was up 39-35, that means that the Republican is probably 95% of the time between 35 and 43. It means that the Democrat's somewhere between 31 and 39. So really, every race that's within 8 points is within the margin of error with a plus or minus 4 margin of error. So let me give you quickly an idea of how many races are within that range. Right now, among the competitive House seats that we've polled, there are, I'm looking at it on my phone, there's 9 House seats that right now are within the margin of error, and there's 4 Senate seats right now that are within the margin of error. So you see that there's just a lot of competitive districts on the table. And that is one thing that's nice about the House and the Senate picture, is there isn't only one path to a majority. It's not like there's a list of districts and it's we have to win every single one of these or else we will not get a majority. I have for the Senate 27 seats that I think we can realistically win, or 27 or 28 seats that I think we can realistically win. And for the House, I have about 63 or 64 seats that I think we can realistically win. So we don't even have to run the table in the potentially competitive districts. We can, it would be better if we won all of them, but if we lose a few of them, that doesn't end the path to the majority.
Okay. Fran said that, you know, we're really focusing on trying to get the Democrats out to vote and unaffiliated voters, but it sounds as if we need to take some 10-point districts, does that mean that we have to get some Republicans too to vote for our state House candidates, our state candidates?
So one thing that's interesting about almost all of the key districts this year is that there are places where Democrats have a decent sized voter registration advantage. And the problem is that over the years, a lot of the registered Democrats have voted for Republican legislative candidates. So I actually think that it's okay to be focusing on Democrats and unaffiliateds, because if we just win the Democratic votes in most of these districts and even break even with unaffiliateds, although I think we'll do better than breaking even with unaffiliateds, we'll win these districts if we can just get the Democrats to actually vote Democratic. So, you know, certainly it'll be nice to get some Republican support, I think, but we can win these without really having to do that. It's winning over registered Democrats who strayed from the party in 2016, but who can be brought back into the fold.
Okay. You mentioned polling with regard to healthcare and such. Did you poll on messaging and or issues that are resonating with voters beyond those, a couple of issues? Or?
Well, I think the key thing with healthcare, and even though it's more of a federal issue, one thing that is just a reality is that people don't know what are federal issues and what are state issues, and a lot of the time control of the legislature gets determined by federal issues. So the big piece on healthcare is Republicans taking away protections for pre-existing conditions. And I think we certainly have a state frame that we can get into that too with Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is very popular. All of these key districts that we're talking about, you would have like 60 to 35% support for Medicaid expansion. So I think that's a good state level issue to bring the healthcare part home. And then, you know, with education, teacher pay is always huge, especially teacher pay in this current climate we're working in, where teachers' jobs are harder than they've ever been before, and goodness knows they're always really hard. But I think people are going to be even more receptive than usual to the message that we need to do something for our teachers, and that the Republicans in the General Assembly and their decade of control have not been good on that front.
Could you identify specifically which are the House and which are the Senate seats that cover the gap between today's polls and what they're showing and winning at least one chamber, winning the chamber in November?
Sure. So I'll be very clear that this is my list. Other people, you know, might have a different list. So this is not like the word of God, because I am not God. But seat 57, as I said earlier, is HD 63. I think the 58th seat would be HD 1, which is in northeastern North Carolina, somewhere that ancestrally we have held that seat. We've lost it over the last decade, but hopefully this time around we can get it back. I see the 59th seat as HD 74, which is in the Winston-Salem suburbs. That's somewhere where we came close in 2016, and in 2018, and our candidate Dan Bessie is running again. He's on the Winston-Salem City Council. He's well known. Seat 60, I think, is HD 83, because Larry Pittman is such a lightning rod, even though on paper that's a tough district. And both HD 74 and HD 83 and HD 63, where you're playing, are sort of examples of the next sort of level of suburbs starting to move more towards the Democratic column. In 2018, we picked up all of the seats, for the most part, that we could pick up in Raleigh and Charlotte. And now we're sort of going the next county over. So like HD 63 is the next county over from Greensboro. HD 74 is not the next county over from Winston-Salem, but the next layer of suburbs over from Winston-Salem. HD 83 is the next county over from Charlotte. So you see a trend in all these districts where, you know, we did better in sort of the first layer of suburbs in 2018, and now we need to start doing better in the second layer of suburbs too. Seat 61, as I said earlier, is the HD 59 in Guilford County. Seat 62 is HD 20 in New Hanover County, which was a very close race last time around, where we're giving it another shot. And And then seat 63 is a second seat in Cabarrus County, HD 82. Both HD 82 and HD 83, I think we lost by 6 points last time around. We have the same candidates running again. And I think the districts are inherently getting more Democratic because of the people who are moving into those districts. And I also hope that our candidates who did a great job in 2018 getting as close as they did, you hope that having one campaign under their belt helps them to get over the top the second time. The Senate, I look at these 5 seats as all being pretty interchangeable in terms of our likelihood of winning them over. And we need to win 2 of them to get control of the Senate. If we win the lieutenant governor's race, which is basically tied right now, we need 3 of them to get over the top if we don't win the lieutenant governor's race. So I'll kind of do these from closeness to Orange County on out to give you a sense of, you know, where you can make the most impact. Senate District 24 in Alamance County and part of Guilford County is an open seat. Rick Gunn, the Republican incumbent, retired. This is a district that voted for Trump by about 8 as an open seat. I think, you know, it should end up pretty close to 50-50. And as noted, it overlaps with the work you're already doing in HD 63 and HD 59, Becca informs me. SD 31 in Forsyth County suburbs and also Davie County. There's a very unpopular Republican incumbent, Joyce Kravick, running for re-election. And one of the wonderful candidates who ran for the House and came up short in 2018, Terry LeGrand, whose name you all might remember, is now running for that Senate district. I think that district's going to be pretty close to 50-50, and that overlaps with the HD 74, where Dan Bessie's running a strong campaign. So we see where there's some nesting in these. Senate Districts 7 and 11 are both sort of just east of the triangle. And these are places that we used to always have the Senate seats in them, and we lost them over the last decade. And those are places that aren't necessarily so much suburban. There may be a little suburban, but they're places where our path to victory is really going to be dependent on doing a good job of getting Black turnout back more to levels when Obama was on the ticket than 2016. They're both districts that are about 30-35% African-American electorate. So if we can actually get the Black share of the vote to be the same as the Black share of the population, we'll have a really good chance in those places. And then the 5th one is Senate District 1, which is in the northeastern part of the state, coterminous with House District 1 that I talked about earlier. So a lot of these districts do sort of overlap on the House and Senate front.
Okay. Do you have a sense of whether the Democratic leading undecideds who don't end up voting for the Democratic state House challenger tend to vote for the Republican instead, or just not to vote in that race?
So I should be clear, those are just people who are undecided right now. This isn't necessarily so much of a historic trend. So I'll tell you a little bit more about these people who say that they're voting for Biden and Cooper, but they say that they're undecided right now for the legislature. They're very much disproportionately younger voters, and they're very much disproportionately voters of color. So African Americans, Latinos, younger voters are the people who are more likely right now to say that they're voting Democratic at the top of the ticket, but they're undecided lower. I think those people are definitely predisposed to end up voting for our candidates, but I think it's a situation where right now, if they don't know our candidates, they're going to say that they're undecided. So again, that just fits so well with the work you're doing, that a lot of that sort of genre of voters, you are doing that outreach to. And I think once they've had a personal touch saying, Ricky Hurtado's great, you know, that sort of thing, they're going to move from that undecided to voting Democratic for the legislature too. And it's the kind of thing where most of those people are probably going to end up voting Democratic for the legislature when they get their ballot anyway. But we think back to Erica McAdoo in HD 63 2 years ago, where we lost by something like 500 votes. It might have ended up even closer than that. I have a feeling you all know the exact margins. You know, you just wonder if there were a few more touches, if more of those people who voted Democratic for Congress or whatever would have voted Democratic for the legislature too. So I think it shows how meaningful the work you're doing is.
Jean wants to know, what are the candidates doing to become better known since they can't hold in-person events? And I think I'll add to that, how much difference, what impact does the money that they've raised make on their name recognition?
So the money that they've raised will make a big difference because for the most part in legislative races, you're focusing more on mail than TV in terms of your expenditures, mail and digital, because you can more narrowly target the voters in your district. So again, candidates aren't going to be doing a ton of that yet because it's just too far out from the election for something with the budget of a legislative race. You want to make sure that once you start really communicating, you have the money to continuously communicate all the way through the election. So definitely I think that money will help when they're able to run digital ads about themselves at a greater level than's happening now, when they're allowed to when they have the resources to be sending out the mail, to do more of that. And another thing that's going to help on the money front is we do have a lot of outside groups that are really interested in these races, not just in North Carolina, but also at the national level. I have national people reaching out to me about North Carolina legislative races all the time. And what they're going to do is, you know, so many of these districts have Republican incumbents who've been in there forever. Those outside efforts are going to be able to do a little bit more of the dirty work and hold these incumbents accountable for their bad records on a lot of the key issues that we're talking about. So that's going to help to tighten these races up too. I think the campaigns themselves and the candidates themselves and volunteers like you all are going to be able to just sort of do one half of the equation, which is getting the positive word out about the candidates. And then all these national interests that are interested in these races are going to be able to hold the Republicans accountable for what they've done in the past. And even though those efforts aren't allowed to directly coordinate, they'll hopefully sort of work together in a good way to get us over the top in all these close races.
Okay. In 2013 or thereabouts, the Republican legislature did away with straight ticket voting. How impactful could that be on the election outcome or on Democratic strategy?
So I think at the end of the day, taking away straight party ticket voting does not make a huge impact on the results. You know, it's something that's maybe a half-point impact or something like that. But as we saw 2 years ago with Erica McAdoo, half a point really can make the difference. So I think that's something that's good for your education piece as you're communicating with voters, is just to make sure that people know that they have to go and vote for these candidates individually, and that you know, it's worth taking the time to go and complete all those lines and that sort of thing on their ballots, and not just vote for the things at the top of the ticket.
Okay. Would you mind just repeating one more time what in the order, what 69 or what 61, 60, 59, 58, and 57 were?
Sure.
For the House.
Yep. HD 63 is my 57th seat. HD 1 is my 58th seat. HD 74 is my 59th seat. HD 83 is my 60th seat. HD 59 is my 61st seat. HD 20 is my 62nd seat, and HD 82 is my 63rd seat. And then in the Senate, I view our 5 opportunities for getting from 23 all the way up to possibly 28 as basically interchangeable, and that is Senate District 1, 7, 11, 24, and 31.
Okay. Thank you. How much is the roll-off from the state races, and do Democrats roll off more than Republicans or less? And you'll have to define roll-off for me and possibly for some others too. I actually don't know what Jennifer means by that.
So roll-off is people who maybe vote for president, governor, senate, and leave the rest of the ballot blank. And I definitely do think that Democrats do it more than Republicans. There's not a huge amount of roll-off, but it is, again, the kind of thing that can make the difference in races that are really close. So again, I think that it is the kind of thing that it's important to make sure that people know to fill out the whole ballot. That's especially important with judges. one thing that was really heartbreaking in 2016 was that in some ways the judicial races are really the best measure of the balance of power in the state, because people don't know anything about the judicial candidates except whether they have a D or an R next to their name. That is the only information that voters have. So presidential race, Senate race, you can sort of end up with a more extreme outcome one way or the other because voters really know the candidates and stray from their sort of inherent partisanship. But judicial races are nothing but their inherent partisanship. So in 2016, in most of the Court of Appeals races, we lost like 50.5 to 49.5. I mean, they were all heartbreakingly close, and they all went the exact same way because that was sort of the generic party distribution in the state, was a 1-point lead for Republicans. And we do drop off more in those. And I think when we lost by a point, we probably would have lost anyway. But if we'd lost all of those by 1/4 of a point, it really might have been because more of our people didn't fill out the judicial races too. So again, that's a good education piece as we're communicating with people.
Ann wants to know, is there a chance for some surprises in what she's calling the tier 2 House races that are lower dollar and maybe lower turnout?
Of course, inherently, if I knew today it would be a surprise, it wouldn't be a surprise, but there definitely often are 1 or 2 legislative races that end up turning out in a way that you just didn't possibly expect. So I think that is possible here. And the way that would happen is if I think Republicans especially were asleep at the wheel. It would probably happen in a district that Trump won by like 12 points. So neither side is making it a first tier race, but you maybe have a Democratic candidate who's working really hard on the grassroots. The Republicans been in for 10 years. They're not taking it seriously. And maybe that grassroots energy from the Democrat does end up letting them sort of just get over the top. I don't have anywhere specific in mind because if I did, it wouldn't be a surprise, but that would be a fun thing to have happen on election night. It happened, unfortunately, more to Democrats in the bad way, the surprise on election night over the last decade. So it'd be nice to have a happy surprise on this election night.
Can you tell us anything about Senate District 18, where Sarah Crawford is running? That her seat overlaps Terrence Everett's House district.
So we have not polled it, but that's good news that we haven't polled it, because I think that Sarah's probably going to end up, just based on what we know about her district, I think she'll end up winning by 8 to 10 points, even if she wasn't an awesome candidate, and that certainly gives her an extra boost too. I know she's not taking it for granted, which is good, because on paper it is one that we should just win. So I don't know how much external investment it's going to get, since it's one that on paper we should win.
Okay. Alan wants to know if you have any specific statistics related to North Carolina Latino voters, and then I guess even to narrow in, since we're so concerned about Ricky Hurtado, do we have any sense of the impact that Latino voters could have in his district?
So I don't have anything specific about Latino voters at the district level, but certainly statewide, they're planning to vote Democratic by 30 or 40 points. And if Latino voters turn out at their share of the registered voter population, that's really going to be a boost. Historically, what's tended to happen is that the share of the vote that Latinos represent has not tended to be as high as their share of the overall electorate. So I know that there's groups that are really focusing on Latino GOTV, and I hope those efforts will be really successful, because it would go a long way, especially in some of these key districts.
Okay. We're nearing the end of our time here. Bonnie, are there any questions that I have overlooked that we should finish up with?
Nope, you got it all.
Okay. Gonna turn it back over to you, Susan and Becca.
Yes. Wow, that was fantastic. Wow, I've just been typing frantically to catch all what you said tonight. It was just wonderful. So thank you very much. And now we will turn it over to Becca.
I just also want to say thank you so much. That was so much information. I was also frantically taking notes. And thank you for taking the time to answer all the questions that we had. To everyone in our audience, thank you so much for coming. I'm sure you're glad that you did. And please remember to sign up for our pep rally on September 2nd and bring your friends, and for at least 2 phone banks in August, if you haven't already, at neighborsoncall.org. Tom Jensen, thank you again so much for being here with us tonight, and good night, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's great. I feel like you've really helped boost our energy to get busy with what we were doing and do more of it. It's like we hired you to say the right things. You're just terrific.
Well, thank you all for everything you're doing. It really does go a long way. We have optimism in a way that we never have had before, and I just think what you're doing is great. So keep it up.
Come back soon. Bye-bye. I'm ending the call now.